President Cyril Ramaphosa will join 4 leaders of the Southern African Customs Union member states in Gaborone, Botswana, later this morning for the union's 7th Heads of State Summit. SACU was formed in the early 1900s to facilitate the movement of goods between the 5 member states: South Africa, Lesotho, Eswatini, Botswana and Namibia. It's the oldest customs union in the world. For more on the story, let's cross live to our colleague Samkele Maseko. Samkele, a very good morning to you. Can you set the scene for us, please, just in terms of what's happening where you are?
Well, indeed, Desiree, the set is seen. We are anticipating the arrival of the 5 heads of states and representatives and prime ministers of Eswatini, and also you go to Lesotho, whom will be part of this Southern African Customs Union. You can see that the stage is set for the heads of states and heads of government whom will be here for the Southern African Customs Union. It also comes at a time when South Africa is battling with stage 6 load shedding, which will affect the trade amongst these countries and the transportation of goods. Particularly speaking to the Minister of Trade and Industry yesterday evening, Minister Ibrahim Patel, he did speak about the disruptions that we usually see in South Africa on the N3 route, which is largely used for the transportation of these goods between all of these 5 countries that are part of this Southern African Customs Union. It also comes at a time when there is a dark cloud over South Africa's relationship, particularly President Ramaphosa's relationship with the President of Namibia over the Phala allegations of the burglary at the home, and how Namibian authorities allegedly assisted the president in doing dirty work when South African authorities met with the Namibian authorities in no man's land to deal with this particular matter of Phala. Namibian authorities saying that they had initially received correspondence from the South African government and did not further get cooperation from the Department of Correctional Services and Justice in the form of Minister Ronald Lamula, who has refuted the Namibian authorities' statement, saying that they had sent him a correspondence on whether a legal matter or a legal case had been registered on the burglary of President Cyril Ramaphosa's home, as it is alleged that those who burgled President Ramaphosa's Phala farm then fled to Namibia, where they were then spotted by the intelligence authorities of the Namibian government. President Ramaphosa earlier last week cancelled his binational commission visit to Namibia over the allegations of his relationship with the Namibian president in assistance of allegedly covering up the burglary at the Phala farm.
Namibia hosts the Secretariat of SACU, and what sort of reports are we expecting from Namibia just in terms of current challenges and the way forward for SACU?
At this point in time, we are anticipating that they will speak largely about the trade and investment between these 2 countries, how COVID-19 has largely impacted and affected their economies, particularly with Namibia having the Secretariat of SACU. They will speak extensively of how trade relations between all of these 5 countries have been impacted negatively. We are anticipating that they will further deliberate on the issues of the escalating fuel prices, largely due to the war within and the instability within Europe, particularly between the war of Russia and Ukraine. We do know that the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has just arrived this week from the G7. He is further going to have an input in a closed session and brief these 5 member countries of the Southern African Customs Union on this particular matter of what came out of the G7 summit. We also do know that the Botswanian President Maseko, was in Austria during the course of the week. He is also going to speak on what came out of his visit to Austria and provide further deliberations on some of the challenges facing these nations, particularly on the issues of trade and investment, which is one of the points that Minister Ibrahim Patel was largely sticking to yesterday evening when we spoke to him, saying that COVID-19 has ravaged these economies, the instability that we are seeing in some of these countries, particularly with the July unrest that took place in South Africa, the disruption of the N3 route, which goes to the Durban port. and also goes to the Richards Bay port in the transportation of goods out of southern African shores going up into other continents, is also affecting the trade and relations between these countries, because they don't only trade amongst themselves, but South Africa is also a good conduit for other neighboring countries in order to take out their produce and take it out to the world at large using the Durban port.
We say that this is the oldest customs, common customs area in the world, and I'm just curious, as the continent operationalizes the Africa Free Trade Agreement, does SACU has lessons to impart onto the African Union and Africa Free Trade Agreement Secretariat?
Indeed, on the Africa Free Trade Agreement, Minister Ibrahim Patel said that South Africa, and particularly President Ramaphosa, is very passionate in the implementation of the Africa Free Trade Agreement, particularly on the trading of all 54 African countries amongst themselves, saying that they're going to be pushing in for South African Parliament to legislate this particular matter, to have it clearly in the blueprint within the South African legislation on how they trade amongst countries, saying that the trade relations amongst SACU members is one of the examples that they can use in order to implement the Africa Free Trade Agreement across all 54 African countries, particularly amongst how these 5 African countries trade amongst themselves. So it is an important feature, particularly when you look at also the commissioner, the South African Revenue Services Commissioner, Edward Kitswetter. He is also part of the South African delegation, as the issue of revenue, the issue of border control, the issue of the South African Revenue Services comes into play here. He had a very important presentation to the President of the Republic, Cyril Ramaphosa, when they were briefing him earlier on how SARS can play a key role in ensuring that trade amongst these countries, ensuring that customs, the transportation of goods is properly recorded, and that you do not get illegal goods coming into these countries without them being properly registered with the South African Revenue Services, with them being properly registered with customs, as that will negatively affect the South African economy and South Africa's revenue collection. So the SARS Commissioner, Edward Kitswetter, is an important part of this delegation led by President Ramaphosa. We also did see the Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. David Masondo, who's part of the South African delegation. He comes in very importantly on the issues of the financial trade between these countries, as this Southern African Customs Union is largely led by the economic cluster and the Department of Trade and Investment within the country. But the Minister of Finance plays an important part in the trade relations between these countries, as he is represented here by the Deputy Minister of Finance, which is David Masondo, who also spoke extensively on the sidelines to us off the record on the issues of trade amongst these countries and the implementation of the Africa Free Trade Agreement, but also speaking on the issues of illicit money flows, issues that affect these individual countries when it comes to trade relations and the transportation and bringing in of illegal goods from into these countries, and how it negatively affects their economies.
There's periodically been conversation about the relevance of SACU and if it's still a necessary institution. Let's just look at all the 5 countries, Samkele, and just how they add value to this platform, what Botswana brings, what South Africa brings, Eswatini, Namibia and Lesotho.
Well, in essence, it is very important from the words of the ministers we engaged with yesterday, and particularly seeing that President Ramaphosa does honor every engagement, every annual engagement of SACU. We do know that the SACU Secretariat SACU in fact now moves from Botswana and goes to Eswatini, whom will take leadership of SACU for the next year going forward, and how it's important, particularly when it comes to trade relations. It is important because each of these countries plays an important role when it comes to the conduit of the goods that are exported by freight, by rail, and also by form of trucks when it comes to the transportation of goods. South Africa plays an important part, particularly because when you look at the road infrastructure in South Africa leading up to the various ports that we have, all of these members of SACU use the South African roading infrastructure, use South African rail infrastructure, and also use South Africa's ports in order for them to transport their goods. Some of these countries, particularly when you look at Eswatini is a landlocked country within South Africa. So South Africa's infrastructural development, particularly when you look at roading infrastructure, rail infrastructure, you look at our ports, and you look at our entry and exit ports, particularly by plane as well, play an important part in the transportation of goods for landlocked countries that are within South Africa's space, particularly Swaziland, particularly when you also look at Lesotho, and when you look at Eswatini and you look at Lesotho. So we play an important part to countries like Botswana, to countries like Namibia, whom also use our ports. For instance, you look at the port on the border of Namibia going on to the Northern Cape province, and how some of the African countries, due to the N3 disruptions to the Durban port, to the Richards Bay port, have opted to cancel their transportation of goods to the Durban and Richards Bay port and use rather the Namibian port. So the trade relations amongst these countries is very important because they have a collaborative manner in which they do things. If there is something wrong with the N3 route going into the Durban port, going into the Richards Bay port, then they do know that they can, in essence, go and use the ports out in Namibia.
Samkele, give us a sense of when proceedings will begin.
Proceedings will begin at any point in time from now. We are waiting for the various dignitaries, the various prime ministers, the various heads of state. We do know that President Cyril Ramaphosa is on his way. He was supposed to land in Botswana at about 8:30 this morning. We are not yet sure whether the president has arrived. We do know that the Namibian president Masisi, the Botswanian president rather Masisi, was out of the country. He was due to land yesterday evening due to security issues that is largely stated around him. When he's supposed to land earlier on in the time stipulated, he would rather delay due to the perceived security threats between him and the former president of Botswana, President Nhama, who is currently out on asylum in South Africa. So in essence, the program will begin at any point from now. We are waiting for the heads of state to make their way here. But what would be rather interesting, Desiree, is will President Cyril Ramaphosa and the Namibian president have a session outside of one another on the issues that are currently plaguing the two heads of state of these two countries, particularly on Palapala? Will they take a moment to deliberate on these particular matters, knowing that President Ramaphosa did cancel his bi-national commission to Namibia earlier on last week, which was supposed to take place at the end of this month? That would be rather interesting, and it will also be the first time that the two heads of state will be meeting here at this Southern African Customs Union meeting, particularly after the revelations of the Palapala matter, with those charges being laid by former spy boss in South Africa, Arthur Fraser, which will actually be one of the key factors that we will be looking into, as it will be the first meeting between these two heads of state since the revelations of these particular matters that has largely caused a political storm in their two countries, with the economic freedom fighters of Namibia calling on there to be accountability against the Namibian president for allegedly helping to conceal this crime of burglary at the president's farm, and allegedly going to kidnap and to unduly interrogate these suspects who allegedly stole millions of dollars from President Cyril Ramaphosa's farm.
Samkele, of course, you'll be watching all of those events and bringing us the details as they unfold. Samkele Maseko is at the SACU meeting in Botswana. Of course, the conversation about customs and border control and economic movements within the five countries is an important conversation as we seek to grow the economies of all these countries.